Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. It's November in Chicago, and the sky takes on a cold gray color, as if it's painting the undertones of a long-ago tragedy. Cold rain hammered against the black umbrellas propped up in St. Joseph's Cemetery, pooling into thin streams that slid down the engraved markings of the headstones. Arthur stood in front of the freshly turned dirt, feeling the chill seep from the wet soil under his feet into his bones. His father, Henry, a man who had built a small manufacturing empire with his hands and an iron will, now lay here. Amidst the whispered consolations and formulaic eulogies of family and friends, Arthur's thoughts were unusually clear. Instead of dwelling on his grief, he was observing dispassionately. His wife, Isabella, his partner of 15 years, was standing gracefully beside him at the moment, her hand resting symbolically on his arm. She wore a well-tailored black Chanel suit. Her makeup was exquisite, and her expression of sadness was just right, as if it had been carefully rehearsed. Their children, Amelia, 16, and Leo, 14, on the other hand, seemed somewhat detached. They stand a few paces away, their eyes drifting from time to someone in the crowd who shouldn't be here. Julian Croft. Julian is a business partner at Isabella's art gallery, a smooth-talking man who smells of cheap cologne and ambition. He is hiding behind a bare oak tree, pretending to pay his respects to a distant relative, but his eyes are like vultures hovering over the Arthur family. The funeral service was over, and guests began to make their way to the parking lot for the reception at Arthur's family's estate. As Arthur turned to leave, Isabella stopped him. "We need to talk." There was no trace of warmth in her voice, and the hand that had been on his arm was withdrawn. Arthur looked at her calmly, waiting. He knew this moment would come eventually. Isabella removed a thick envelope from her designer handbag, moving with a crisp, clean motion as if she were handing over a business document. She slipped the envelope into Arthur's hand. "What's this?" Arthur asked knowingly, his voice frighteningly calm. Isabella's mouth curled into an icy smile that failed to reach her carefully painted eyes. "The divorce papers. I thought it would be fitting to end this farce at your father's funeral. The timing is just right." Arthur glanced down at the envelope without opening it. "According to your father's will," Isabella continued, her voice filled with triumphant braggadocio, "all the assets in his name now legally belong to me." Amelia and Leo came forward at this point and stood beside their mother, forming a solid, ostracizing camp against him. Their faces were uniformly cold and contemptuous. "We've decided," Amelia announced, her voice sharp and mean, "that we're going to change our last name to Julian's. Anyway, you're dead to us, Mr. Hayes." Leo, the boy who used to pester him every weekend to go fishing at the lake, just grunted contemptuously, looking down and toying with the brand new, decidedly extravagant watch on his wrist that didn't belong to him at his age. Arthur felt none of the expected heartbreak, only a cold, seething anger. He nodded silently, not arguing, not questioning. He just looked deeply at Isabella, at the children he had once held so dear. Then he turned and walked through the sparse crowd to his car. In his rearview mirror, he could see Isabella talking excitedly to Julian, and the reporters were already circling like sharks smelling blood. A grieving son, abandoned by his wife and children on the day of his father's funeral, and the loss of everything. This would undoubtedly be the most powerful headline in Chicago high society tomorrow. He started the car and drove smoothly away from the cemetery. They all thought he was broken, thought he was a beaten, pathetic man. But what they didn't know was that all of this, from the deterioration of his father's condition to this humiliating moment today, had played out in no small part according to the plan Arthur had set in motion 5 years ago. The real game, which had just begun. The cheap motel in Warrenville smelled of disinfectant and perennial dampness in the air. The room's windows faced a busy interstate highway, and the roar of trucks driving by was the constant soundtrack of the place. It was a world away from Arthur's mansion on the shores of Lake Winnetka, but at the moment, this room, number 214, was Arthur's command center. 3 disposable cell phones, each with a specific purpose, are neatly arranged on a low table next to the bed. A huge map of Chicago was taped to the wall, with key locations marked with different colored pins. Spread out on the table were clippings from major newspapers and gossip magazines. The headline in the Chicago Tribune read, "Manufacturing Giant's Funeral Takes a Turn." only son swept off his feet. A society column, on the other hand, read, Isabella Hayes seeks solace in grief, close to business partner Julian Croft. Arthur read each story with an expressionless face. Isabella's legal team moved quickly, freezing all joint accounts and credit cards in his name within hours of him leaving the cemetery. But they were a step too late. Over the past month, Arthur had withdrawn large amounts of cash from different ATMs, each time staying precisely under the amount that didn't need to be reported. There were 3 rhythmic knocks on the door, a predetermined code word. Arthur confirmed it through the cat's eye and opened the door. In walked Clara, a former financial crimes analyst for the FBI and now one of Chicago's top private investigators. She set a heavy duffel bag on the floor. "You look terrible," Clara commented as she surveyed Arthur's bearded appearance and wrinkled clothes. "It's part of the show," Arthur replied. "What's new?" Clara pulls out an encrypted tablet. "Isabella and Julian have officially moved into the manor. They threw a celebratory party last night at Elenia's restaurant, inviting half of Chicago's celebrities. The media is making a big deal out of the victim finally finds happiness drama." Arthur nodded unsurprisingly. "What about the kids?" Amelia posted starting a new life with a father who really cares about me statuses on social media with the estate's pool in the background. Leo, on the other hand, was showing off the limited edition sports car model Julian gave him in front of his classmates. Clara paused and added, "Over at the company, the board of directors panicked over your absence and the negative media coverage, and Henry Industries' stock price dropped 12% at the opening bell." "Good." A cold smile emerged from the corner of Arthur's mouth. Everything was expected. He opened the duffel bag Clara had brought with her. Inside were bundles of cash, a brand new encrypted cell phone, and a stack of documents. "Is Helena's side ready?" "Yep. She's ready to go to court at any time to testify about Julian's past business fraud. But she's nervous, and Julian has a reputation for retaliation. Helena was the CFO of Julian's last company, and one of the people he screwed over the most." "What about Oliver?" Arthur asked about his lawyer. "The phones are ringing off the hook. Isabella's legal team is petitioning the court for an emergency order for full control of all your father's assets, citing abandonment of the family and mental instability." "Just what I need." Arthur's eyes sharpened. Early the next morning, Arthur appeared in a haggard, disheveled, and disoriented state at a generic cafe to meet with his old friend and lawyer, Oliver. The patrons around him recognize him and begin to whisper, "You've got to pull yourself together, Arthur." Oliver lowered his voice and said anxiously, "Isabella's lawyer is claiming in court that your behavior proves that you are no longer fit to administer the estate. If the judge adopts it, she will get everything according to the rider in your father's will." "What's the timetable like?" Arthur asked, deliberately slurring his words while glancing at the curious guests at the neighboring table with his afterimage. "The emergency hearing is next week. They want to get it over with quickly while you're in bad shape." Oliver gestured to Arthur's scruffy appearance. "Good." Arthur's voice suddenly regained clarity and firmness, and his eyes sharpened. "File the standard objections, but don't push too hard. We need them to remain confident." "Are all the offshore accounts secure?" Oliver asked in a low voice. "They don't know anything about Swiss or Cayman Islands accounts." "But Arthur, are you sure about this? It's a big risk once we let them take control of Henry Industries. They won't destroy what they think is about to make them rich." Arthur replied, "Julian's greed is beyond imagination." A week later, Arthur willfully misses the emergency hearing. Oliver called immediately after the hearing. It was exactly as you thought. The judge awarded temporary control of Henry Industries to Isabella based on your absence and those concerning reports about your mental state. They must be celebrating at the estate right now. Not a trace of emotion could be heard in Arthur's voice. "Is that package ready?" "Ready. But Arthur, this has crossed the line. If anyone finds out the problem will be serious." "They won't." Arthur interrupted. "Send it tonight, as we discussed." That night, Isabella was throwing a big victory party at the estate. The champagne towers were glittering and the music was deafening. Julian moves through the guests like a hostess, receiving congratulations, both genuine and fake. Just as the party reaches its climax, a courier delivers a sealed bag of legal documents, naming Isabella and asking her to sign for it in person. To the curious eyes of the crowd, Isabella opened the envelope with slight confusion. Inside was only a piece of paper with a bank account and password, and a line of handwritten notes. The real Henry legacy. Access by midnight, or it expires permanently. Isabella's heart raced wildly. She immediately made her excuses to leave the party and rushed into Henry's living study. With trembling fingers, she entered the account and password on her laptop. The balance displayed on the screen made her almost stop breathing. $212 million. The figure far exceeded the publicly known total of Henry's estate. Just as she stared at the screen in disbelief, a pop-up window popped up. Transfer initiated. Authentication required. Isabella didn't hesitate for a second. She quickly entered her personal identification information, passport number, and even used the identity credentials she had just obtained from Henry Industries' temporary authorized person to transfer the huge sum of money into an offshore account that she thought was safe and secure, and that had been set up by Julian in advance. The screen flashed, transfer confirmed, and then went dark. When she tried to log back in, the system said account does not exist. At the modest motel outside the city, Arthur was watching what was happening in his study through miniature cameras hidden throughout the house. He saw Isabella's expression change from ecstasy to confusion to panic. She frantically calls her lawyer, fear and disbelief written all over her face. Arthur turned off the surveillance feed and turned to Clara. How long did it take her to realize that the money never really existed? Doesn't matter. Clara smiled. What does matter is that she just provided all the evidence we needed of her attempted unauthorized access and wire fraud. All of the operational records for this fraudulent account have been flagged by federal authorities. Arthur nodded, a look of satisfaction finally appearing on his face. Now, we just need to wait. 3 weeks after gaining control of Henry Industries, Julian held an all-staff meeting at the company's headquarters. He stood at the podium and announced his grand vision with gusto. The company would be completely reorganized, and the focus of business would shift from traditional precision manufacturing to consumer electronics. The market for manufacturing is saturated, he declared in a loud voice while Isabella watched him with adoration from the stage. Our future lies in smart home and entertainment systems. We will immediately divest ourselves of all government and corporate order business. At the motel, Arthur watched the farce via webcast. He noticed that Julian's pronouncement created an immediate uproar in the industry. At the close of the day, Henry Industries' stock plummeted 18%. Analysts were questioning the radical and amateurish strategic shift. He's walking right into our trap, Clara said as she scrolled through real-time financial data. The company's division heads are already reaching out to headhunters. 3 major large clients have also announced that they will be re-evaluating their contracts. What about the Herald program? Arthur asked. It was the core technology, a revolutionary alloy material that his father and he had been secretly developing for years. It's still secure. Julian doesn't have access to those encrypted files, and even Isabella doesn't know it exists. Time to create some chaos. Arthur glanced at his watch. The next day, several anonymous whistleblower letters were sent to the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, with direct allegations of potential fraud at Henry Industries after new management took over. Although the allegations were unsubstantiated for the time being, they triggered an automatic review process that further undermined investor confidence. Meanwhile, the company's key technicians and senior engineers began to receive attractive job offers from competitors. Within days, Julian found himself leading a shell company that was losing both talent and market value. Isabella, on the other hand, begins her own metamorphosis. Gone is the gallery owner once known for her taste in the Chicago art world. In her place is a woman who dresses in age-inappropriate, gaudy clothes, parties with Julian at nightclubs until dawn, and splurges on jewelry and sports cars. At the aristocratic private school Amelia attends, rumors spread about her mother's slutty behavior. One morning, she finds herself isolated from her former friends and her invitation to a party withdrawn. When she confronts one of her classmates, the other simply pulls out her cell phone and shows her a video that's gone viral on the internet. A video of Isabella drunkenly exiting a nightclub and blasting away at paparazzi cameras. Leo faced similar ostracism at his own prep school. To add insult to injury, an anonymous tip letter is sent to the school administration alleging that he sold banned substances to his classmates. Although no evidence was found after an investigation, the incident cast a thick shadow over him. In the space of a month, the Hayes family name went from respected to infamous. Isabella's profligacy intensifies as her social status crumbles, causing a rift in her relationship with Julian. Julian finds himself not only responsible for a company on the verge of bankruptcy, but also dealing with a woman who spends without restraint. She's emptying the accounts faster than we expected. Clara reported from their secret meeting point. Julian has mortgaged his personal assets to try to stabilize the company, but it's like plugging a leak in a sinking ship. Arthur nodded thoughtfully. What about that offshore account? Isabella tried and failed to access it multiple times. Based on her repeated maneuvers, the Federal Fraud Investigation Unit has built up a pretty strong case file. What about the kids? Arthur asked. Clara pulled up surveillance photos. Amelia was planning to graduate early and go to college in Europe, away from the stigma her mother brought. Leo's grades are falling apart, and he's already been caught drinking on campus twice. A flicker of imperceptible emotion, perhaps remorse, flickered across Arthur's face, but it quickly disappeared. They made their choice. He said coolly, "It's time to execute Phase 4. The next morning, Julian arrived at Henry Industries headquarters to find the halls filled with federal agents. The previous anonymous tip had been upgraded to a formal investigation, and the agents were seizing the servers and all documents related to the company's finances after the change in management. Julian called Isabella in a panic. They say there are anomalies in the accounts, unauthorized transfers, funds are missing. What the hell did you do? Me? Isabella screamed. You're the one who assured me that this company was our gold mine. Now bring your lawyer here immediately. Julian had just hung up when his assistant brought even worse news. The company's largest government contract had been suspended due to the investigation. Without this contract, the company will not be able to make payroll in a few weeks. That afternoon, just as Isabella and Julian were being grilled by federal agents, Arthur made his first public appearance after disappearing for weeks. Clean-shaven and wearing an impeccably tailored Armani suit, he walked into the office of one of Chicago's most respected wealth management experts, Fedra Reynolds. For the past several years, Fedra had been his father Henry's personal financial advisor and had also been involved in the design of certain special arrangements. Mr. Hayes, Fedra greeted him warmly. I was surprised to get your call. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. Arthur replied. I think it's time to activate the Lazarus Protocol. Fedra's expression became serious and focused. She removes a secure tablet and enters a long string of complex passwords. Everything is ready as you instructed 3 years ago. Are you sure you want to proceed? Arthur's eyes were unwavering. Very sure. Good. She handed him a biometric authentication device. Once activated, it cannot be reversed. Without hesitation, Arthur pressed his thumb against the sensor. They built their future on a beach, he said calmly, and now the tide is coming in. A devastating legal and financial storm unfolded throughout Chicago with the precision of a military operation. The estate was slapped with a court order of seizure. All of Julian and Isabella's personal and corporate lines of credit were abruptly canceled. The trust fund set up for Amelia and Leo was frozen due to suspected irregularities. When Isabella and Julian arrived home in the evening, exhausted, their cell phones began ringing frantically with emergency alerts from banks, credit card companies, and financial institutions. Julian's personal accounts were also frozen due to suspicious connections to the Henry Industries investigation. This can't be right, Julian muttered as he frantically called his personal banker, only to be transferred to the fraud processing department. Someone is behind this. Isabella's face instantly turned pale as a horrible thought floated through her mind. Arthur, she whispered, but how is that possible? He has nothing left. We took everything. Apparently not. Julian smiled bitterly. Just then the house phone rang, startling them both. Julian picked up the phone, and Oliver Walsh's calm voice came through the receiver. Mr. Croft, I am calling to inform you that the property you are currently living in has been placed under receivership pending the settlement of multiple claims against it. You and all occupants have been asked to vacate within 72 hours. This is ridiculous. Julian yelled, We'll fight this to the end. You are welcome to try, Oliver replied calmly. However, I should inform you that a similar maneuver is being made against all properties currently in your RMS. Hayes' name. Have a good night. Julian slams down the phone. Amelia and Leo appeared in the doorway, anxiety written all over their faces. What happened? Amelia questioned. My credit card was just declined at the mall. It's so embarrassing. Isabella turned to her daughter as panic spread through her. It's okay, honey. It's just a misunderstanding. Like when my college fund was suddenly scrutinized? Amelia's voice rose. Stanford's admissions office called. They said my application was in jeopardy because of a lapsed financial guarantee. Leo pushed his sister away. My Instagram is about to explode. Everyone's saying we're broke and that we're being investigated for fraud. Julian's phone buzzed with a new email. He read it, and his face turned as white as paper. The board has called an emergency meeting, and they are considering suspending me and putting the blame for the investigation on me. As the family descended into a panicked argument, no one noticed the hidden camera in the den that was flickering with a faint red light, recording every moment of their falling apart. From the command center outside the city, Arthur watches the scene with indifference. Stress reveals a man's true nature. He muttered. Clara looks a little disturbed. Your children are suffering too. They chose their side. Arthur replied, though the muscles in his jaw tightened. Actions always have consequences. He tore his gaze away from the screen showing his former family and focused on the stream of financial data scrolling across another screen. Initiate the final phase, he ordered. It's time to end this game. Under the fluorescent lights of a hotel conference room, a small auction was underway. Items from the Hayes estate were organized into categories and numbered for sale. Furniture, art, electronics, and jewelry that held the memories of 15 years of marriage were now being sold cheaply for fractions of their value in front of curious onlookers and serious buyers. Arthur, wearing a baseball cap and nondescript jacket, stands at the back of the crowd. He watched as Isabella's prized diamond necklace was auctioned off by a jeweler for less than a tenth of its original price. The court-enforced liquidation to pay off creditors was a process that was enough to destroy anyone's self-esteem, and the whispers of the spectators around him intensified the humiliation. I hear she's living in a 2-bedroom apartment now. A woman whispered into her companion's ear. And he, the husband, moved to California. Couldn't face the humiliation. Arthur smiled faintly. These rumors he had so carefully concocted were spreading with planned precision. The auctioneer held up a platinum men's ring. Lot 37, men's wedding ring with diamond setting. Starting bid is $500. Arthur watched without a ripple as his once wedding ring was bought by a pawnbroker for $750. This last, visible connection was easily disposed of in a matter of seconds. Early the next morning, news outlets in Chicago reported that Arthur Hayes had apparently fled the United States. Border records showed him boarding a flight to Switzerland, and financial experts speculated that he was attempting to access his hidden offshore accounts before authorities could freeze all his assets. And indeed, Arthur is settling into a remote wooded cabin in southern Illinois, accessible only by private road. Purchased through multiple shell companies and registered in the names of 2 non-existent elderly Montana couples, the property's dense forests were perfectly shielded from satellite prying eyes. For the next 2 weeks, Arthur cut off all external communications. Clara, meanwhile, monitors the situation from Chicago. The carefully constructed narrative continues to fester in public opinion. Arthur Hayes, a once respected business leader, abandons his responsibilities and flees, leaving chaos in his wake. Meanwhile, Julian's financial and legal woes mount. Unable to tap into Arthur's genuine resources and knowledge, he makes an increasingly desperate attempt to save Henley Industries, using everything he owns as collateral for an emergency loan. Isabella also faces her own legal challenges arising from fraudulent account manipulation. She begins to blame Julian for everything, accusing him of egging her on. Their relationship deteriorates in endless public spats, all of which are captured by news-hungry paparazzi. Amelia and Leo disappear completely from social media. While their former friends draw a line in the sand, online taunts and attacks multiply. On the 17th day of Arthur's disappearance, he received his first update from Clara via a secure satellite connection. Everything is going according to plan. Clara reported, the government's investigation has expanded to include tax evasion. Isabella's gallery is being audited. Julian's previous company is also under scrutiny for accounting irregularities. What about the children? Amelia's dream of a European university is completely shattered. Leo was once again caught with contraband and has been suspended from school. They are now living with Isabella in a rented apartment in Bellevue. Julian moved out last week after he and Isabella had a huge fight at an upscale restaurant that made headlines in the gossip columns. Arthur digested the information in silence. What about the Herald project? Still secure and moving forward as planned. The team believes they'll be able to produce a usable prototype within a few months. Good. Prepare for my return. 2 days later, the Chicago Sun-Times ran a devastating in-depth story revealing that Julian Croft had been investigated for securities fraud during his tenure at his former company. Although the allegations were ultimately unsubstantiated, the article implied that his relationship with Isabella began when he provided art investment advice to her gallery nearly 2 years before the divorce. Even more damaging were the leaked text messages between Isabella and Julian. In the text messages, they blatantly discussed how to accelerate access to the Hayes family fortune and explicitly mentioned Henry's deteriorating health and the terms of the will's inheritance. The public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Overnight, the tide of public opinion completely reversed. Arthur Hayes is no longer the villain who abandoned his family, but maybe the victim of an elaborate plot. Isabella's phone is ringing off the hook, but it's no longer friends who are calling, but former allies who are desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. Amelia and Leo are facing a new round of harassment at school and are now accused of being accomplices in a conspiracy to frame their father. One rainy Tuesday morning, Julian arrives at the Henry Industries headquarters to find that his access card is no longer valid. The board of directors unanimously votes to fire him and cooperate fully with federal investigators. As security guards escorted him out of the building, employees watched him through the windows, some even with gloating smiles on their faces. That night, as Isabella and the kids ate takeout in their sparsely furnished apartment, the doorbell rang. A courier handed over a sealed bag of legal documents addressed to the three of them. With trembling hands, Isabella inserts the envelope's flash drive into her laptop. A video began to play. It was security footage from their former residence, recording dozens of private conversations over the past 2 years. Conversations about Arthur, conversations about Henry's money, conversations about getting what they deserved. Most damning of all, there's a video of Amelia and Leo with Julian, mocking their pathetic father and discussing how they'll squander their inheritance once Isabella gains control. He has a record of everything we've done. Isabella whispered, her face ashen. He's been spying on us. Amelia grabbed the laptop. We have to destroy this. It's too late. Leo interrupted her, pointing at the screen. A new line of text appeared on the screen. Copies have been provided to the appropriate authorities and media. Broadcasting will begin tomorrow. In the dead silence that followed, all three of them realized the same thing. Arthur hadn't fled in defeat. He had not been destroyed by their betrayal. He had orchestrated everything, guiding them, step by step, into the trap they had dug for themselves. Dawn broke, and the rhythm of the rain pounding on the windows became the background soundtrack to the media storm that swept through the city. Every local TV station and mainstream news site was headlining the same breaking story: the Hayes family conspiracy exposed. Leaked surveillance footage showed, with hard evidence, the months-long conspiracy of Isabella, Julian, and even the children. In the footage, they discuss Henry's death as an opportunity and calculate how to maximize their gains from the family's fortune. One particularly vicious video, timestamped 3 days before the funeral, shows Julian instructing Isabella on what to say. Your family's property is now legally mine. Say it hard and make him suffer. In her Bellevue apartment, Isabella sits stiffly on the couch, empty wine bottles strewn around her. She watches her reputation disintegrate in real time on the TV screen. Her cell phone rings incessantly, but instead of support, there are calls from journalists seeking comment and messages of shock and disgust from former friends. Amelia emerged from her bedroom, her eyes red and swollen. My social media accounts are full of abuse. People called us gold diggers and worse. What about your brother? Isabella asked with a blank face. Still sleeping. He got drunk last night. Amelia didn't finish. After they watched more videos that revealed the extent of their betrayal, Leo ransacked the family liquor cabinet and locked himself in his room. The doorbell rang suddenly, startling them both. Isabella cautiously made her way to the door and peered through the cat's eye. A tall woman in a smart suit stood outside the door, flanked by two men who looked to be federal agents. "Isabella Hayes?" the woman asked as the door opened. "I'm FBI Special Agent Diana Winters. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, conspiracy, and attempted theft by fraud." Amelia froze in the doorway as the agents handcuffed a dazed Isabella and took her away. A neighbor across the street was filming the whole thing on his cell phone, no doubt adding to the online frenzy. Across town, Julian is having his own moment of reckoning. Federal agents were packing up documents and electronic devices in his downtown apartment as his attorney argued in vain about the scope of the search warrant. "This is persecution," Julian shouted when the agents found a hidden safe behind a bookshelf. "It's Arthur Hayes who's setting me up." Agent Winters sneered. "Mr. Croft, we've been investigating your financial activities for over 3 years." Mr. Hayes simply provided additional evidence that corroborated the case file we already had. Julian's face instantly lost its blood color. 3 years? That's impossible. I only met Isabella 2 years ago. Funny, your train of thought jumped straight to Isabella Hayes. The agent commented, "We're actually referring to your infractions at your previous company, Croft Solutions. But go ahead and help us connect the dots." At the headquarters of Henry Industries, employees gathered in front of a display in the atrium to watch a live feed of the unfolding scandal. A murmur rang through the crowd as the main doors opened and Arthur Hayes walked in, accompanied by Oliver and several members of the board of directors. Arthur stops and examines the shocked faces in front of him. "I guess we have work to do," he said calmly. A few hours later, after a series of meetings with executives and key teams, Arthur returned to his own office. The Chicago skyline outside the window hadn't changed, but everything else had been turned upside down. An emergency meeting of the board of directors unanimously approved. Oliver reported that you have been reinstated as CEO and given greater authority to stabilize the company. The stock price rose 15% in response to the news. Arthur nodded. "What about the Herald program?" "Intact. Julian doesn't even know it exists." "Good." Arthur turned to the window. "The federal case is moving fast. The evidence is overwhelming. Julian's previous legal problems make him especially vulnerable. The DA's already talking about using him to testify against Isabella in exchange for a plea deal. They'll both have to go to jail." "What about my kids?" Oliver hesitated. "They're not facing charges, but it's a bad situation, Arthur. Their participation in the video was clearly documented. Amelia's college acceptance was all but withdrawn. Leo's school is considering expelling him. They're basically social pariahs now." Arthur's jaw muscles twitched. "They made their choices. They're still your kids," Oliver said softly. "Teenagers being manipulated by adults they trust. Everyone has a choice." Arthur replied coldly. "They chose Julian and everything he promised." The Emerald Lounge on the top floor of the Columbia Building had a magnificent panoramic view of all of Chicago. But tonight, Julian Croft had no desire to enjoy it. He arched his back, sipped his third scotch, and paranoidly refreshed his cell phone, waiting for any news from his lawyer. When the barstool next to him is seated, he doesn't look up until a familiar voice orders, "McAllen 25-year. Neat." Julian's head snapped up to find Arthur Hayes sitting next to him, wearing a charcoal gray suit that made Julian's own designer clothes look both tacky and cheap. "It's you," Julian said through gritted teeth. "You've got some nerve showing your face." Arthur took the drink from the bartender and nodded his thanks. "That's pretty funny coming from someone who moved into my house and tried to steal my company. I'm facing federal charges because of you." "No," Arthur corrected calmly. "You're facing federal charges because of your own behavior. Those behaviors that began long before you met my wife." Wariness flashed in Julian's eyes. "What do you mean?" "The Croft Solution, 2019. After you spent a weekend in Aspen with Senator Harrington's aide, you mysteriously got your hands on a Department of Defense contract. You then inflated performance metrics to get additional funding. And then there's that offshore account you had in Belize where your consulting fees went." The blood faded from Julian's face. How could you possibly know all this? I know everything about you, Julian. I knew who you were before you met Isabella. Arthur took a sip of his whiskey. Do you really think it was a coincidence that you showed up at her gallery? Out of all the art advisors in Chicago, she contacted you. A glint of realization flashed in Julian's eyes. From the beginning, it was you who orchestrated everything. Not exactly. I didn't ask you to seduce my wife or force you to manipulate my children against me. I simply created the opportunity and then observed what you would do. Why? Julian questioned. Why go through all this trouble? Arthur's eyes sharpened. 3 years ago, I discovered some anomalies in my company's government contracts. Small but significant discrepancies that could have cost us millions and compromised our security clearance. The trail led to a mole within Henry Industries, someone who was leaking information to a competitor. He paused. That competitor, that's Croft Solutions. Your company, your operation. Ridiculous. Julian shook his head in denial. There's no way I didn't know. Is that so? Arthur interrupted. You're too busy enjoying the profits to question the source of the intelligence. But I question everything. That's why I set a trap. A false security breach that, if exploited, would have disastrous consequences. When your team tried to use it against a government client, I got my proof. You could have just turned me in. Julian's voice was almost inaudible, and then risk a public scandal that would undermine confidence in my company's security systems? No, I needed a more comprehensive solution. Arthur finished his whiskey and set his glass firmly on the bar. I needed to get the full picture of the threat. So I started watching you, studying you. I learned about your financial problems, your desperation to maintain your lifestyle. So you used Isabella as bait. Julian swallowed hard. I simply removed certain protections and then observed what happened naturally. Your reputation for coveting other people's property has been spreading for a long time. Isabella is unhappy and restless. The attraction between you was predictable. You're insane, Julian whispered. No, Arthur corrected. I'm just organized. There's a difference. He glanced at his watch. At this very moment, federal agents are executing additional search warrants targeting several storage facilities associated with your former CFO. They will find evidence that will ensure you spend at least 15 years in federal prison. He stood up and straightened his cuffs. I came here as a courtesy to let you know there is another option. What option? A private jet is waiting at Boeing Field. It can take you anywhere outside the jurisdiction of the United States. You have enough money in a Belizean account to disappear comfortably. The authorities don't know about that account yet. By the time they find out, you'll have already settled down elsewhere with the new identity my companion prepared for you. Julian stared at him incredulously. Why are you helping me escape? I'm not helping you escape. I'm giving you a choice. Either go to jail and end up betraying Isabella to save yourself, or go into exile and never contact any member of my family again. Arthur's voice turned cold. Either way, you will be removed from the equation. And if I refuse? What if I make our conversation tonight public? Arthur smiled faintly. Who would believe you? Desperate accusations from a man facing multiple federal indictments? Besides, you only have 43 minutes, after which the FBI will find enough evidence to revoke all possibility of your bail. Julian's shoulders slumped. You've calculated everything. Not exactly, Arthur replied. I never anticipated that you would go that far with my children. It was an accident. For a moment, some sort of real emotion flickered across Arthur's face. Amelia and Leo, collateral damage in a war they don't understand. For that, I hold you personally responsible. Julian blanched under Arthur's icy fury. The plane leaves in 90 minutes, whether you get on it or not. Arthur continued, setting down a key card on the bar. Use this to access the private elevator to the tarmac. A helicopter is waiting there to take you to the airport. He turned to prepare to leave, then paused. One last thing. If I don't give a specific confirmation signal within 2 hours, the pilot is instructed to divert the flight to a U.S. Air Force base. Choose quickly, but wisely. As Arthur walked away, Julian called after him. What about Isabella? Did she get the same opportunity? Arthur didn't look back. Isabella made her choice. Now she has to live with the consequences. 3 months later, Chicago's financial district was abuzz with news. Henry Industries' stock price not only recovered, but soared to unprecedented heights with the announcement of the launch of its revolutionary Herald security system. It's a quantum encryption protocol that makes digital communications virtually unbreakable. In the sleek, glassy headquarters building, Arthur was reviewing the quarterly report. Oliver walked in, bringing the day's paper. The headlines told the story of Julian Croft's arrest in Bali after attempting to flee to a non-extradition country. His plane had been mysteriously diverted to a U.S. airport where federal agents had been waiting. "I thought you gave him a chance to escape," Oliver commented. "I gave him a choice," Arthur corrected. "He chose to try to contact Isabella before he left, thus violating my terms. Actions always have consequences." Oliver nodded, having long ago accepted his friend's unshakable code of conduct. "The custody hearing is tomorrow." Arthur's expression remained calm. "It is." The kids filed character statements. "Would you like to read it?" "Nah. Their actions will speak louder than any prepared statement." Oliver hesitated. "They've both been working, you know. Amelia has been volunteering at a youth shelter downtown. Leo, on the other hand, has been doing maintenance work at the school to pay for the damage caused by his earlier incident." "I know. Of course you know." Oliver sighed. "Would you at least consider talking to them before the hearing?" Arthur turned to the window and watched the rain cut through the glass. "That's all for now, Oliver." The next morning, dark clouds hung low over the King County Courthouse. Media cameras tracked Arthur all the way as he arrived, but he was indifferent to their loud questions. The courtroom was closed to the press. Arthur sits alone on one side with Oliver beside him. Across the room, Amelia and Leo sat with a court-appointed guardian. Both teens are dressed conservatively, but that doesn't hide their anxiety. Before the judge made her announcement, she turned to Amelia. "Miss Hayes, do you have anything to say?" Amelia stood up, her hands trembling slightly. "Your Honor, I have prepared a statement, but I would like to say a few words from the heart." She took a deep breath. 3 months ago, I stood at a funeral and told my father that he was dead to me. I said a lot of cruel, horrible things I can never take back and that I am deeply ashamed of. Her voice shook a little, but quickly stabilized. "I was manipulated by people I trusted, but that's no excuse. I made choices, terrible choices, and I hurt the one person who has always protected me. I don't expect to be forgiven. I can't forgive myself. But I'm my father's daughter, and the Hayes family is responsible for the consequences. I'm ready to face whatever I deserve, whatever it is." She sat down and wiped away a tear. The judge nodded and turned to Leo. The boy stood, nervous but with determined eyes. "Your Honor, my sister and I have spent every day since then trying to understand how we could be so blind. Our father wasn't perfect, no one is, but he never deserved what we did to him." He glanced quickly at Arthur before continuing. "Those who only used us as weapons against my father gave us everything we wanted, and we let them use us that way. Nothing I can say can make up for that." He swallowed hard. "If the court awards custody to my father, I will accept whatever rules and restrictions he sets. If not, I understand. Either way, I will spend the rest of my life trying to make myself worthy of the Hayes name." The courtroom fell silent. The judge reviewed his notes and then turned to Arthur. "Mr. Hayes, do you have any response to your children's statements?" Arthur slowly stood up and buttoned his suit. "Your Honor, I have heard the words of my children today and observed their actions over the past 3 months. They spoke of facing consequences and taking responsibility. These are values I have tried to instill in them from a young age." He paused, his tone calm and restrained. "The decisions that led us to stand here today were not made overnight. They evolved through hundreds of tiny choices, each one taking us one step further away from what a family should be. Rebuilding what's broken takes just as many tiny choices towards something better." Arthur turned slightly, and for the first time in months, looked directly at his children. "I'm ready, with the proper boundaries and expectations, to begin the process." The judge nodded. "Given the current circumstances and the expressed wishes of the minors, I am awarding full custody to Arthur Hayes, to be reviewed in 6 months." After the formalities were over, in the private lounge reserved for the participants, Arthur finally turned to his children. "There are conditions." He got right to the point. "Both of you will continue your community service. Your electronic devices and communications will be monitored. You will have weekly counseling sessions with Dr. Harrington. Amelia, you must complete high school before you can be considered for college applications. Leo, your academic performance must improve significantly." The siblings nodded silently, accepting each condition. You will not be moving back to the manor immediately. I have arranged for an apartment near my penthouse where you will live under supervision. All privileges need to be earned and not taken for granted. We understand, Amelia said softly. Arthur's expression remained stern. Trust, once broken, does not heal easily. I don't know if it will ever be fully restored. It depends on the choices you make in the future. What about forgiveness? Leo asked hesitantly. Arthur's eyes went cold. Forgiveness is not part of this agreement. Forgiveness is a gift that I am not ready to give. What I am offering is a chance to rebuild. Nothing more. The siblings exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. Then Amelia said, "That's fair. It's more than we deserve, considering everything. Oliver will fill you in on the details." We're done talking. Arthur walks toward the door, then stops. One last thing. The last name Hayes is not a birthright. It is earned through loyalty, integrity, and strength. Remember that. With that, he left, the door closing firmly behind him. 6 months later, on a clear December evening, Arthur hosted a small dinner party at his penthouse. Amelia and Leo had prepared the meal as part of their ongoing effort to prove their responsibility. During dinner, the conversation is mostly formal, but there are occasional moments that resemble normal family interactions. After dinner, while Amelia cleared the plates, Leo found Arthur on the balcony. "I heard Mom's appeal was denied," he said carefully. "Justice is continuing its course," Arthur replied. Leo gathered his courage. "Have you ever wondered if there might be another way? If you could stop them without collateral damage? No public humiliation, no criminal charges, no irreparable damage to reputation." Arthur finished for him and turned to his son. "There's always another way, Leo. I chose the one that was the most thorough, the clearest, the most ruthless." "Yes," Leo added softly, "the most ruthless." "Yes," Arthur admitted unapologetically. Kindness can be a weakness when dealing with those who mistake kindness for opportunity. Even against family? Arthur's gaze was firm. Especially family. The closer you are to them, the more devastating their betrayal will be. The response must be proportional. Leo nodded slowly, digesting the harsh philosophy. "I think I understand now. Not just what you did, but why you did it." He looked out at the lights of the city. "I don't want to be like Julian, taking what isn't mine and betraying those who trusted me. But I don't know if I can be like you either." For the first time in their recent interactions, a hint of something akin to approval flickered in Arthur's eyes. "That's good. You shouldn't be like me. You should be better than me. Learn my ways, but don't inherit my limitations." As they turned to enter the house, Arthur's hand rested briefly on Leo's shoulder, a gesture so unexpected that the boy almost flinched. "The Hayes name doesn't require you to be ruthless," Arthur said calmly. "Only strong enough to protect that which is important by any means necessary." That wasn't forgiveness. Arthur Hayes didn't forgive betrayal, nor was that reconciliation in any traditional sense. But, in the complex calculus of the family's new reality, it was an acknowledgement that rebuilding had begun, brick by careful brick, on a foundation that had been permanently altered but not completely destroyed. As midnight approached, the children had gone to their rooms to rest. Arthur stands alone on the balcony. His cell phone displayed a notification from the prison system that Isabella's latest request for reconsideration had been denied, ensuring that she would serve her entire sentence. He turned off the notification with a grimace and looked out over his city. Everything was unfolding according to his design. His enemies had been thoroughly defeated, his fortune was safe and sound, and his company was thriving. The price was high, trust was irrevocably shattered, innocence was gone, and family bonds were reshaped into strategic alliances rather than unconditional ties. Is it all worth it? That question, in the cold night air, has no answer. Arthur, the architect of destruction and rebirth, raised his glass in a lonely toast to the empire he had given everything to protect. He recognized the truth that had guided him from the beginning. In the game of power and betrayal, there is no real victory, only varying degrees of well-calculated sacrifice. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.